Okay, this could be a fun one. Um, because I sat with this one for a long time. I got the question from people in the past and have answered it, but I've never created a video on it. But one of my students kind of posed it to me. So let's take this one on. And it's this idea that using psychedelics to, get a taste of or experience oneness or awareness or consciousness. Is it cheating? Is it a shortcut in a negative way? Right. And I've walked my dogs and had this thought for years, and I've answered it to many people, but I've never made a video on it. So let's tackle it. I think, I think I want to challenge the premise before I even answer the question, and it's because the question assumes that awakening or enlightenment, and I'm not claiming either of those, right? But just that idea is something that you earn through time, effort, suffering, right, etc. But is truth something you earn, or is it something you recognize? Because that's a very different question to me. Here's an analogy. Hopefully, it's a decent one, right? So imagine somebody flew a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest, right? Yeah, they've seen the view. They see what it looks like from up there, right? But they haven't developed the endurance, the judgment, the skills, the resilience, the experience. That's the same as someone who climbed it every step, right? And I think, especially, when we're talking about psychedelics, and I think the one that helps you get a glimpse of enlightenment or awareness and consciousness the most, and again, others do too, but I think the most consistent one is 5-MeO DMT. And I think it's a lot like that, right? In the sense that it can reveal or show you a perspective that many meditators spend decades seeking, and that was my experience. I meditated for years. But my third experience was like, oh, that that's what they were talking about in all my books, right? But seeing from that perspective isn't the same thing as living from it. And that's the importance of an integration, right? So I think one of the biggest misconceptions in the psychedelic community is confusing realization with transformation, right? And I say that quite a bit. Again, yeah, you got some intellectual information, but how have you used it to transform? And for me, I used that experience as like the reference point of like, oh, that's what it's like. And if I could have that experience here, I can train my mind and my body to locate it again, right? And again, I've served a lot of people, and you know, realization can happen in an instant, right? But it's just a realization. It's temporary. Transformation happens over thousands of ordinary moments. So someone can experience like a complete non-dual experience, this unity consciousness, connection with source, right? They could achieve that on a Saturday and then still yell at their spouse on Monday, right? So the question is why? It's because the nervous system, habits, trauma, conditioning, programming, whatever term you want to use, it hasn't magically disappeared, right? The experience isn't the work, it's just an invitation to the work. And I think it's also worth stating and remembering that, meditation isn't immune to spiritual bypassing either. People have meditated for 30 years and they're still arrogant, right? I've sat with people who've memorized entire spiritual traditions while still being deeply attached to their identity. I met one very recently, told me for an hour how, he wrote books on meditation, how he experienced samadhi. And I'm thinking, as he's going through this whole, you know, um, resume of everything that he's done, I'm thinking, this is interesting, not with judgment, but just noticing. People become monks and still abuse power, right? So time alone doesn't produce wisdom, neither does psychedelics. So the question is it cheating? Okay, you could answer that question if you'd like. I'd ask another question, right? And we'll see if this analogy works, right? Is looking through a telescope cheating because it allows you to see Saturn before you spent years building one? Of course not. It's just my perspective. Of course not. The telescope doesn't make you an astronomer. It just allows you to see something that was already there, right? Actually, that's not a bad analogy. But now the real learning begins, right? So I'd say the same for 5-MeO. It doesn't make someone enlightened. Some people think it does. I shouldn't say that. Maybe it does for them. Didn't for me, but it can reveal a dimension of consciousness that was always present. So whether somebody can embody that realization is a completely and entirely different question. In fact, I would argue that these experiences often raise the bar rather than lower it. And a lot of people that I work with, and even myself, find life more challenging after a profound awakening experience because now they know it's possible. Now you are going to definitely recognize your conditioning, and you can't unknow that experience, right? So, yeah, in 5-MeO, the experience may last 20 minutes. Integration can last years, decades. And I think there's this other assumption hiding underneath this conversation, right? Something that we could uncover together here, unpack together. I think sometimes people they speak as though awakening belongs to one particular tradition or one particular path. I don't agree with that. And history would say otherwise as well. So it's not just me. People could have awakened through meditation, through self-inquiry, through prayer. Um, I've had a client that I work with through grief, profound, deep grief, through near-death experiences, and I think Eckhart Tolle said just spontaneously. And yeah, through 5-MeO DMT, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, right? They're just different doors, same possibility, right? And I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but I studied Buddhism for some time, and I think the Buddha taught that suffering ends through seeing reality clearly. And I think again, meditation is one way of cultivating that clarity. And it's an exciting and an extraordinary path, but it's not the only doorway human beings have ever discovered, right? I think ultimately, I don't think the ultimate question, maybe is a better way of framing it. So, or even the important question is, how did you arrive? The important question is, can you live with what you've seen? Or can you live what you've seen? And can you embody what you've seen? Um, how do you apply what you've seen to your everyday life? Because to me, again, insight is just the beginning. Embodiment is like the lifelong journey. And I think that's the answer to this question. But all feedback is welcome. Let me know your thoughts.